Like I can easily envision a company getting to 50 or 100 million in revenue with like 25 employees, because they'll have a bunch of synthetic employees as well doing a lot of the work.
George and I were both born in Eastern Europe, Bulgaria and Georgia, the country. And our
just a Black Sea apart.
Yeah, and our cultures at the time didn't exactly put a premium on capitalism and entrepreneurship, but you moved to the US at age 14. Can you tell me how and what drew you to the US?
So my dad was a little nutty, and he believed that Soviet Union was going to fall apart and that English was going to be the kind of the way to survive.
And when did he think that
Like 1980s, early 80s, yeah. And so he forced us to learn English, me and my brother, when we were very young. I, on my own, applied to US prep schools when I was 12. I got into a few of them, fortunately, because I had American tutors in Georgia who wrote me reference letters, and so it kind of worked out. And then I went to the US Embassy, got a visa, and showed up in the US when I was 14. And I was one of the very first Soviet kids that they allowed to leave to come to the US. So I was very lucky. So I had this ingrained in me that like going to America was the thing to do. So even though I grew up in a very Soviet environment, like the support for America was very, very high in my mind. And you know, I kind of jokingly, like I've built 3 companies since then, and I joke that actually coming to America was my first startup.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of game changing for my life.
Yeah, we had very similar upbringings. So before you became Grindr CEO in 2022, you had actually co-founded several startups. And you've said before, there's a lot of founders in this room, you've said before that founding a company is an impossible thing to do, and that you have to be a little bit arrogant to become a founder.
Arrogant and crazy.
Arrogant and crazy. So I'd like to hear what you think it takes to start a company in today's environment.
Yeah, so one of my mottos in life is like do impossible things, which obviously is an oxymoron, but I think it kind of encompasses at least how I shape my life. And I came up with it once because I had an employee at Shift, my previous company, who was really complaining about like, this can't be done, this can't be done. I'm like, look, man, my whole life is impossible because like I'm now here doing this, and like look at where I was born, so nothing's actually impossible. And so that's been really effective for me as an executive. Frankly, it's very effective with my kids too, because now my daughter, whenever she doesn't want to do something, she's like, you know, oh, nothing is impossible, Dada, and I can actually do it, which is really good. And I think that's true kind of always. That's not a differentiator thing. I think the thing that's really different about now versus, say, even a decade ago is the number of people you will need to build a company is actually going to be much less than you needed in the past.
Why?
Because of what AI is going to do to how we work. And so if a company is starting now, or especially a year from now, like I can easily envision a company getting to 50 or 100 million in revenue with like 25 employees, because they'll have a bunch of synthetic employees as well doing a lot of the work. And so that's a really big difference, because then the people you bring on board as your core team need to be exceptionally good, because the synthetics are going to be providing leverage for them, and they need to be able to work that way. So I think talent is going to become a more complex. I mean, it's always difficult, but in startups, often they're like, well, this is like okay for now. He'll be good enough for the next 18 months, get me to the next stage, and then I'll get somebody else. I don't know if you could do that anymore in the world that we're entering to in the future.
And I like that, synthetic employees. I hadn't heard that before. So, so George actually took Grindr public. And a few things to note. Grindr generated $75.3 million just in Q1 of 2024, and it has a market cap of $2.1 billion. For those who aren't familiar with the Grindr model, how do you make money?
Yeah. Well, vast majority of the money we make is through subscriptions. So we have 2 tiers of subscriptions. One's $19.99 and one's $39.99, and people subscribe to that. We have a fairly low payer penetration. It's about 7%. As a comparison point, Tinder, which is kind of the dominant product for straight people, it's about 15% payer penetration. 15, yeah. So there's a lot of room. Largely that's because Grindr never really focused on monetization until about 3 years ago. So we're only now starting to kind of drive monetization in a big way by investing in the product and building features that people want to pay for. And then we have an ads business, which is about 15% of our revenue. And that's a big growth opportunity as well for us, because we have a very kind of in-demand user base. You know, average gay couple in America has a household income that's twice as high as an average straight couple.
Interesting.
Gay men have 2x likelihood of having a JD, MBA, PhD, MD versus a straight male counterpart. They also don't usually have children, so they have a lot of disposable income and more time. So the audience is really good for advertising, and so that's another big growth vector. So those are the two primary ways in which we make money.
Yeah. I want to come to you guys for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll send somebody your way. Before we come to you, I have one more question for you. So it really feels like Grindr is innovating at kind of breakneck speed. You have added features around trip planning. It's more of a community than the other dating apps. You're creating a gayborhood in your pocket. What features can users expect in the near future?
Yeah, so when I joined, Grindr's always been the thing that it does really well, which is like the right now immediate use case with a user or long-term relationships. Our rough estimate is somewhere between 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 gay male relationships in the US originate on Grindr. So we do play a pretty big role in that sense. But people do use the product in a very community sense as well. Like, hey, I'm going to Singapore, let me use Grindr to figure out what I'm going to be doing in Singapore. And oftentimes, like I interviewed a candidate once for a fairly senior role. It's like, oh yeah, my friend just had a tour of Singapore for 3 days with this guy that he met with on Grindr, and that's not an uncommon thing. So a lot of what our focus has been like, how do we productize all that? People already use Grindr in so many different ways, but we don't have features for that. Can we build features for those? And so we are now going in that direction. The two things we've publicly talked about, one is travel, because I think there's a pretty big opportunity there in travel planning and in events planning, and that's both local discovery and when you're traveling discovery. Like, hey, what are the activities going on tonight? Where should I go to a bar? What are the places for me to stay, et cetera? And then the second big one is around health and wellness. Not surprisingly, health and wellness is really important to gay bi men. It's like a big driver of how we make decisions. And so there's a lot we can do there. We've not really given use case examples of that yet because we're not ready to do that, but I think it'll be kind of coming. But you can imagine anything from like, people might want to buy certain types of medications, which they already do, but we actually can extend our brand to let them do that and integrate that with our core product to, loneliness and depression is a really big thing in our community, and if we can do things through AI to help support those problems and help people be in a better place, that could be really valuable for the users. So that's kind of what we're envisioning.
And I want to highlight something here because as I'm hearing you talk, if you're on Tinder or Bumble, once you meet somebody, you get off the app.
Correct.
But Grindr, technically, you can stay on the app.
A lot of people stay on the app even in a relationship. That's actually quite common. Yes, people kind of do a little bit age out. So we do have an opportunity to kind of bring people, 40 plus to be more engaged. If you look at our user cohorts, like we start to not have as many users at that age group as we used to. So there is a way to bring them back, I think. But in general, people stay on the app for a long time.
That's fascinating. Any questions? Right here. Please state your name, company, and be concise.
Hey, I'm Andy Dunn. My company's called Pi. I live in Chicago. Do you think Chicago can ever become a great tech place?
Yeah, so we were really lucky. Grindr used to be owned by the Chinese, then was forced through CFIUS to be bought by a non-Chinese ownership cohort, which is mostly American and American allies that bought it. And the team, the engineering team at that point, was almost all based in Taiwan. So when that transition happened, they all quit. So there's like emergency, we have no engineering, what are we going to do in 2020 in the middle of COVID? It so happened that one of the people involved in that transaction was Sam Yagan, who is the former CEO of Match. And he had been a CEO of another company that had sold to FedEx, and they had let go of a bunch of engineers. And so he's like, wow, I actually have a bunch of engineers in Chicago that like Grindr should hire. And so we got a little bit of this like acqui-hire-like situation. It wasn't actually a acqui-hire, but we brought a bunch of engineers in together from the Shopper team into Chicago, so we end up with a Chicago team that way. And since then, we've dramatically expanded that team. That's actually where most of our engineers are. We do have engineers in the Bay Area as well. And it's been really effective. I generally think that, during the last decade, it's gotten a little bit out of control in terms of what people's expectations are, and the prima donna nature of stuff has been a little bit too much. And that's something we don't experience in Chicago. And that's very positive. The flip side that was hard is actually finding mobile talent. So like hiring iOS engineers in Chicago has been way more difficult than I would have expected.
Grindr has 13.7 million monthly active users. That's an insane number. Why do you think that your dating app competitors, like Tinder and Bumble, are on the decline while you're growing?
Well, I'm asked this question a lot, and I try to be super diplomatic in what I say.
No, don't be diplomatic.
Yeah, well, it's like, we are all kind of trying to do the same thing, which is like help people find love, right? So I think we should be positive about it. But one of the things that strikes me about how Bumble and Tinder approach the world is that they, frankly, don't treat 70% of their users very well.
Explain that.
Like 70% of people who use both of those products are men. And the way they talk about their male users is actually really negative. To the point where like they're offensive to them. And like I'm not their target audience, but I as a guy, I'm offended. And it's not because like, I think it's great to be talking about how we are really targeting women and we want to create a really great experience for women. 100%, that's awesome. But you can create a great experience for somebody without creating a bad experience for somebody else.
And is it the messaging or the user experience?
It's both. And it's like the messaging, but the user experience as well. So you have like these huge percentage of men who are looking to settle down, who are looking to find a partner, and they're very captive to the product in the period when they're there. Why not build a lot of features for them? By the way, those are your paying users as well, because both of the products are built in a way in which men pay and women don't have to pay for the product as much. And so I think it's a huge missed opportunity in kind of how they speak about it. And in some ways it's gotten worse because instead, like as I run into problems, instead of thinking like, hey, I got this huge audience I don't do anything for, let me lean into that one. They're trying to lean more into the audience that they've always been doing something for, which is the women. But the result of that is they're even more negative about men. So like when I listen to the earnings, I'm just like, wow, like if I was a user, I wouldn't want to even be on this product given how they're talking about me. So that's one thing. The second thing is, the product innovation hasn't really happened, right? Like they've had the product they've had and they've not really innovated. Everyone's like, well, why is Hinge doing so well? Well, because Hinge is actually product innovating. So people are moving to a product that is new and different, which is exactly what you'd expect. I mean, if we did not product innovate for a long time either, that's why we're now very much focused on product innovation, because if you don't do that, then users are gonna go somewhere else, inevitably.
In 30 seconds, can you tell me, in 10 years, is Grindr still a dating app or is it something else?
Well, we already, like I said this at Investor Day last month, that we are more akin to a social network than we're a dating app. Yes, dating and the casual dating experience is always going to be core to Grindr. I mean, very directly, like sex is a really big part of gay culture, and if you try to remove that, that would not really work. But around that, we can build a lot of stuff that's more social network-like, with a very kind of direct online and in real life component. So I think that's the direction we'll be headed into.
And when can we expect more of these features to come to the app?
So we gave a lot of direction on that at Investor Day. I mean, one of the big things we're working on right now is called Right Now. That's going to be coming late this year, early next year. Some of it is already in launch, but a lot more of it. And then the rest of it probably kind of in 25 and into 26.
Amazing. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you.